بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وبعد, Imam al-Ghazali rahmatullahi alayhi, he is taking us through the way in which we can have a present heart in each of the actions of prayer. And so we have so far taken at-tahara, and we spoke about the tahara being the tahara of the heart as well as the tahara of the outer, the thawb, the body, the place of prayer. So likewise we have to purify our hearts. Satrul awrah, he says, know that it is to protect that which is unsightly from being seen by others from our body. He says likewise consider that which is unsightly within your heart and protect that from being seen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How so? By working on the heart. And we all have issues of our hearts that we need to work on. And I would suggest in our time today, we have even more problems of the heart than previous generations. He says, وَأَمَّا الْإِسْتِقْبَالِ, as for facing the Qibla, so it is to face the Qibla with your face, of course, and your body. He says, but don't be a person who's facing the Qibla with their body, their face, but they are turning away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with their heart. So your heart is directed towards something other than the Qibla, such as anything from the dunya. And there are those that will have their hearts attached and turned towards that which is minor, that which is major, etc. Then he says, وَأَمَّا الْإِعْتِدَالُ قَائِمًا, he says, as for standing upright, then it is basically with the body, it's a way of reminding the heart and directing the heart to be upright in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says the intention. So when you have the niyyah, have the intention of applying that which is fard upon us, وَأَقِمِ الصَّلَاةِ, and also asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept with the body and so on and so forth. And then we spoke about the takbir, and this is where we stopped. And he says, make sure that your heart does not prove your tongue to be a liar. So when I say Allahu Akbar with my tongue, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala al-Akbaru in my heart? That's the question I have to ask myself. And Al-Mullah Ali Qari rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentions that when a person raises their hands to pray, it's like they're removing themselves from the dunya. They're lifting the veil between themselves and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so that should be an indication to the heart that I'm leaving the dunya behind me now. And the masjid previously was a place. We said the masjid was a place, a space for detaching from the dunya and attaching to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, attaching to the akhirah. But nowadays, unfortunately, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and forgive us. We have made the masjid a place of dunya. Why? Because we have constant distractions in our pockets. And even in the khutbah, subhanallah, you'll see people on their phone. When you're standing on the mimbar, you'll see people on their phone, they're scrolling through their phone, etc., whilst they're supposed to be listening to the khutbah. Even if the imam is the most boring of imams, it's ibadah. It's ibadah. And so the level of engagement that the imam is giving me is not a condition for my presence in the khutbah, i.e. my mental and spiritual presence. I am supposed to be listening to the khutbah regardless whether the imam is boring, exciting, interesting, relevant, irrelevant, etc. Why? Because it's ibadah. It's ibadah. And likewise in the masjid, if I am prior to my prayer by a few minutes, if I'm scrolling on the phone and I'm looking at various things related to the dunya on my phone, when the prayer starts, how am I possibly going to be thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the akhirah when I've been attaching my heart to various things on the phone? And so the phone is something to really think about in relation to the way we attach our hearts to the dunya. And in fact, we could speak about so many areas of the phone: the comparing ourselves to others, the ideological warfare that takes place. For many people now, they won't be able to tell the difference between their own formed opinions and the opinions of others, the opinions they've soaked up by constantly scrolling and reading, etc. Why? Because they don't have space or time to think. There's no space outside of their scrolling to think. Constant engagement, mental engagement, through listening, through reading, through watching, and so on and so forth. And then he says, وَأَمَّا دُعَاءُ الْإِسْتِفْتَاحِ. So now we've said Allahu Akbar, and now we're coming to the dua. He says, فَأَوَّلُ كَلِمَاتِهِ قَوْلُكَ وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. So he says the first thing that you say when you open the dua is, I have turned my face to the one who incepted the heavens and the earth. وَلَيْسَ الْمُرَادُ بِالْوَجْهِ الْوَجْهُ الظَّاهِرِ. And he's saying that the intention behind this is not the apparent face, not the face that we use to look at things, etc. فإنك إنما وجهته إلى جهة القبلة. Why? Because you have directed your face to what? The Qibla. He says, والله سبحانه يتقدس عن أن تحده الجهات حتى تقبل بوجه بدنك عليه. So he says, and this is an area now we're going to get into an issue of aqidah, of Islamic theology. So he says that the dua is وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. I have turned my face to the direction of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, samawati wal ard. Yeah, that's the literal translation. And he's saying it cannot be that you have turned your literal face. Why? Because you have turned your literal face to which direction? To the direction of the Qibla. And he says, وَاللَّهُ سُبْحَانَهُ يَتَقَدَّسُ عَنْ أَنْ تَحِدَهُ الْجِهَاتُ حَتَّى تَقْبِلَ بِوَجْهِ بَدْنِكَ عَلَيْهِ. It's impossible that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encompassed in a direction so that you can turn to Him. So what is the author saying here? What's the author saying? Any idea? What's Imam al-Ghazali saying? No ideas? Let me read it again. He says, والله سبحانه يتقدس عن أن تحده الجهات حتى تقبل بوجهك أو بوجه بدنك عليه. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above being encompassed by a direction which you can face with the face of your body. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above being encompassed by direction. So what he's saying here, who is it that created time and space? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not restricted by the boundaries of His creation. Therefore, we cannot suggest that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be encompassed by a particular direction. Why? Because that is below Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the issue between the Asha'ira and the Maturidiyya on one side and the Hanabila on the other side. The issue of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's direction, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's position, etc. And both arguments, they come from trying to raise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to that which is befitting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And both are arguments which are within the framework of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. They are both arguments which are within the framework of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. You will find great scholars of Islam from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah that hold this opinion, such as Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala himself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we cannot ascribe to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a direction. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is above direction, because He created direction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created direction. It's like, for example, creation within the boundaries of time and space have to have a beginning and have to have an end. Correct or incorrect? Correct. Likewise, they have to have a place. There has to be a space that is embodied by the creation. Right now, I have a space, but I am confounded to that space. I have to be in a space. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created time and created space. Allah has no beginning and has no end. Beginning and end are from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, as in within our realm of existence. Likewise, space. The spaces that we understand and that we encompass are from the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the argument on one side. The argument on the other side is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has direction. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is literally above all of His creation, etc. And both are coming from Quran and Sunnah. They both come from Quran and Sunnah, interpretation of the Quran and Sunnah based upon different principles. That's the crux of the matter, and that's the crux of the matter in all issues of Aqeedah. As long as the opinions are from within the three schools of Aqeedah that are considered to be Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, i.e. the Asha'ira, the Maturidiyya, and the Hanabila. You will have some today that will argue, no, this goes against the Salaf. But the issue is, the Salaf did not speak about such issues. The Sahaba did not speak about such issues. If the Sahaba spoke clearly about such issues, there wouldn't be a difference of opinion between the scholars who came after the Sahaba. That's a matter of fact. If the Sahaba spoke clearly on the issues of Aqeedah within which you will find difference, you would find no difference within those issues. Imam al-Nawawi, rahimahullah ta'ala, for example, is considered to be a scholar of the highest caliber. If he says a hadith is authentic, it's considered to be authentic. In language, he's considered to be a hujjah in the Arabic language, in his time anyway. Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah ta'ala, is considered to be from the a'immah of Islam, just like Imam al-Nawawi. Imam al-Ghazali, likewise, considered to be from the a'immah of the Imams of Islam. Ibn Hajar, considered to be from the a'immah of the Imams of Islam. Al-Dhahabi, likewise. Ibn al-Qayyim, likewise. And so, but you find these mashayikh, these ulama, these imams, they have different opinions, i.e. they are on one side of the two arguments. If it was straight, cut, clear as the sun, as they say, then you wouldn't find this difference of opinion to exist. That's the simple matter of fact when it comes to Aqeedah. And Aqeedah, the issues in Aqeedah are majority based upon language. 90% based upon language, interpretation of language and principles used to interpret language and so on and so forth. And we spoke about the purpose behind studying Aqeedah. The purpose behind studying Aqeedah is not to find out who's correct and who's incorrect, but to learn who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, so that you can develop a relationship with Allah in your life, and you can better yourself through knowing Allah and through attaching yourself to Allah. That's the purpose of Aqeedah. Today, Aqeedah has become a plaything for certain groups. They use it to classify those who are correct, those who are incorrect, those who are upon a manhaj, those who are off a manhaj, whatever that manhaj may be. They use Aqeedah to get views, to get likes, to get subscribers, to get clout. And this is not the purpose of Aqeedah, the purpose of Islam. It's not the purpose of studying. And so with these issues, we leave it to the ulama. We don't engage ourselves in that which doesn't concern us, because these are scholarly debates and scholarly discussions, especially if a person doesn't understand the Arabic language. If you don't understand the Arabic language, if you don't know how to read the Quran properly, if you don't know the basics of how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you shouldn't be debating about issues of Aqeedah, issues of fiqh, issues of politics, issues of any regard, until you have learned the basics and you are at a level where you now have time to read the discussions and the debates of the scholars. Otherwise, it's shaitan that's wasting your time. Shaitan is wasting your time. And shaitan will waste your time with that which is good. That which is good can become bad, and shaitan will use it to waste your time. And if you look at those who study Islam, you'll find many of them, they fall into this trap. They'll spend years studying. They spend years abroad studying. They come back, what have they learned? How to argue with people. They've learned who's on the correct path, who's off the correct path. Who determines these things? This is ilm al-ghayb. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determines. If we say that the Asha'ira are not from Ahlul Sunnah, are we saying Imam al-Nawawi is not from Ahlul Sunnah, Ibn al-Hajar is not from Ahlul Sunnah, Imam al-Ghazali is not from Ahlul Sunnah, and so on and so forth? If we say that the Hanabila are not from Ahlul Sunnah, are we saying the likes of Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn al-Jawzi, Ibn al-Qayyim, al-Dhahabi, because apparently he followed his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah in his opinions of Aqeedah. If we say, are we going to say that's the case? Of course not. Then he says, وَإِنَّمَا وَجْهُ الْقَلْبِ هُوَ الَّذِي تَتَوَجَّهُ بِهِ إِلَى فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. He says it is the face of your heart that you turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. It's the face of your heart that you turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with. And so when you open the dua of istiftah and you say وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, you want to make sure that your heart has turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that you are praying towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, muraqabah. Then he says, فانظر إلي أمتوجه إلى أمانيه وهمه في البيت والسوق متبع للشهوات أو مقبل على فاطر السماوات. So look to your heart. When you say these words, look to your heart. Is it turned towards your hopes and your interests and your concerns related to your household, to the marketplace, to various other forms of distraction? Is it following its desires? You might be in prayer and you're thinking about your desires, for example. Or is it turned towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَاطِرِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, the one who has incepted the heavens and the earth. Then he says, وَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَكُونَ أَوَّلْ مَفَاتِيحَتِكَ لِلْمُنَاجَاةِ بِالْكَذِبِ وَالْإِخْتِلَاقِ. He says, be wary and don't allow yourself to open up the dua al-istiftah with a lie. How so? You're saying وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, but really your heart is turned towards all other things other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the problem when ibadah becomes ritualistic, when ibadah becomes ritualized, when we have no idea what we're saying, no idea what we're doing. We're just raising our hands, saying things, etc. And it's very easy to fall into it. And that's why it's important to attend halaqatul dhikr, the circles of remembrance, i.e. the circles wherein Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remembered, such as we hope a circle like this, regardless who's sitting here, we're mentioning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's name. Or any lesson, any halaqa, any dars, any session where we're reminded about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if you're studying, for example, the fuqaha, the ulama, they say al-fiqh yuqassi al-qalb, that fiqh hardens the heart. If you're studying fiqh, if you're studying language, you have to have a circle wherein you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to remind you why you're doing those things, to remind you of the reality of this dunya and so on and so forth. Then he says, وَلَن يَنصَرِفَ الْوَجْهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ تَعَالَى إِلَّا بِانْصِرَافِهِ عَمَّا سِوَاهُ. And this is the conundrum of our time. This is the conundrum of our time. He says, your heart will not turn towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala except by turning away from everything other than Him. And previously, we can assume it was very easy to turn away from Allah, from everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in comparison to our time today. In comparison to our time today. Think back to prior to the invention of a mobile phone. When you leave your house, you don't know what's happening in your house until you get home. When you leave your house, you have no idea what's happening in the household until you get home. You're concerned with what's in front of you. When you come to the masjid, you don't know what's happening outside. There are no news updates. You don't know what's happening halfway across the world. You wouldn't find out what's happened in another continent or country until the news in the evening or in the morning or in the afternoon, etc. Now it's constant updates, constant information. You have a constant reminder on your phone. People constantly able to interact with you and contact you. And not only that, but they feel entitled. They assume that if they call you, you should answer on their time. And so your personal space is invaded. So where do we give our personal space, time to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In the cities as well. Cities are even worse. Why? Because they're designed to be distractive. They're designed to distract you constantly and to keep you running, to keep you going, to keep you focused on the next big thing you can acquire. And add to that the social media. Social media is one of the worst of platforms when it comes to attaching our hearts to the dunya. Because any type of dunya that you're interested in, you'll find a way into it on the internet. For the most niche of areas, you'll find there are interest sites, there are social media platforms, there are YouTube videos, etc. And so to detach today, that's the conundrum and that's the struggle of our time. And so we have to try to focus on detaching from the dunya, reminding ourselves our purpose here. And we have glorified the dunya in our time today. The dunya has become glorified to the extent that if you say to someone that this dunya, it only serves the purpose of the akhirah. The dunya is here to serve our akhirah, not the other way around. People say that's extreme. That's extreme. Take from the dunya as well as for your deen. Live a little. It's extreme to cut off the dunya. It's not extreme. That's the way of Islam. That's the methodology of Islam. That's how the Prophet ﷺ lived. That's how the Sahaba lived. That's how the righteous and the successful from the tabi'een lived. That's how the righteous and successful from our history lived. It's not extreme. We're not here for the sake of this life. We're not here for the sake of eating and drinking and consuming and sleeping and so on and so forth. That's not our purpose. Our purpose, we have a higher purpose than that. And that's why people feel unfulfilled, even though they have the dunya and everything the dunya can offer, they still feel unfulfilled. Because the dunya, we're not here for the dunya. And you'll find those who are poor, impoverished, and they don't care for the dunya. Why? Because they found their fulfillment elsewhere. Intellectual fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment, fulfillment of developing character, etc. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given man an aql and a qalb, and they are the areas that need to be fulfilled. When your stomach is empty, it starts to make sounds and moves, etc., to let you know that you're hungry. Likewise, the heart, when it's hungry, but it's not hungry for the dunya, it's hungry for its creator. The mind gets hungry, but it's hungry for stimulation, intellectual stimulation. And the ulama, they say, just as the body dies if you don't feed it food, the mind dies if you don't feed it knowledge. And that's what we've become today. As has been mentioned before, we have become dead consumers. We're seeking our fulfillment through consumption, not realizing that we're not going to be fulfilled. And that's where you have the case where individuals are paying ridiculous amounts of money for experiences that really bring no benefit to them, nor do they bring any benefit to other people. For example, the submarine that I'm sure everyone has heard about. Of course, we're not happy to hear of the death of Muslims or non-Muslims. But think about it from another perspective. Apparently, it costs £250,000 per person to go on that submersive contraption that they call the submarine. £250,000 per person. So let's exclude the pilot and assume the pilot isn't paying. The pilot's being paid. So that's £1 million. £1 million for a trip to see some wreckage at the bottom of a seabed. How long can they stay under there for? What really are they going to gain from that? And how many people could be fed for £1 million? How many people can be fed? And someone might say, oh, but they were millionaires and billionaires. To them, that's pocket change. Perhaps to them, but not to others. Perhaps to them, it's pocket change, but not to others. £1 million could feed some small nations. £1 million is a lot of money. A lot of money. Recently, I mentioned a friend of mine went to do some charity work, and he said £3 can feed an entire family for 1 week. £3 can feed an entire family for 1 week. 3 meals a day. £3. And you have individuals that are spending £250,000 to go on a trip to the bottom of the ocean to see a shipwreck and come back up. From the Islamic perspective, that's not permissible. That's a waste of money. It's a waste of money. And it's a waste of time. And that's what the dunya has become, entertainment. It's become a form of entertainment. If someone has that much time, there are so many better things to do. Likewise, individuals paying thousands of pounds to jump out of helicopters and aeroplanes and things like this. It's a waste of money, it's a waste of time, and that money could be used elsewhere.
So I was going to ask, everything that you earn in terms of the dunya will be questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we did have that 200,000, we used it to feed orphans or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will question us in their judgment.
Yeah, so it's correct. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will ask us and also reward us for everything that we earn, if it's halal, and everything that we spend, if we spend it in a righteous way.
But if the people that went in the submarine, if they paid their zakat, then how is it haram for them?
If they paid their zakat, how is it haram for them? Because it's israf. It's israf. It's extravagant spending, lavish spending. Look, the Prophet ﷺ, he made gold, cutlery and utensils haram for the ummah, not just for he didn't say if you can afford it, you can own it. The Prophet ﷺ, he made it haram. Why? extravagance and lavish spending. And the fuqaha, they mention one of the reasons is because it breaks the hearts of poor people to see someone drinking and eating from golden utensils whilst they can't afford to eat. It's extravagance and lavish spending. I honestly believe it's haram. I believe it's haram for someone to.
How can you blame the rich person for the poor person?
I'm not blaming the rich person for the poor person. I'm blaming the rich person for a lack of responsibility with his wealth. It's amana, it's responsibility.
But you've done zakat.
Yeah, but zakat is so. Look, if what's the response? Every person has a fard. The fard of the scholar is to teach. The fard of the wealthy person is to spend. And let's say he invests his money, into more businesses, etc. To even then, even if he's giving charity, £250,000, that's a lot of money. That's. Even if it's not to him, it's a lot of money to other people. If we were in a state where people weren't suffering, people weren't poor, people weren't impoverished, people had been taken care of, then spend the money. But we're not in that state.
Like £10 to us, £5 may not be a lot of money. Then to other people in other countries, £5 is a lot. If it's even £3.
And I would argue the same argument for someone that spends £5 on a bubble tea.
So you think that's haram?
I would say I think it's lavish spending.
But if it's in the sun, it's haram, but not the bubble tea.
Yeah, because I don't want to say it's haram, the bubble tea, but I would put it personally, I'll put it in the same category. I wouldn't say it's necessarily haram. £250,000, I'll say it's haram. To go spend 200, what benefit is there? At least the bubble tea, there's some, you're getting some sort of benefit, your physical benefit. But going in a submarine and traveling all the way to the bottom of the ocean, coming up, spending all of that money, putting your life at risk for what? For what? But but this is the problem in the West. In the West now, lavish spending has become the norms. Where you'll have someone, he earns, let's say, £1,500 a month, and he goes out and buys an £800 jacket. And he doesn't live in Antarctic conditions. He doesn't live in freezing cold conditions. Or you have a young man who comes from an impoverished household, and he'll happily spend £200 on a pair of trainers. Or you have a young man, he doesn't have any savings, but he's happy to spend £400 a month on a car, financing a car because of the status that it brings him, etc. That's the predicament that we live in. This is all lavish spending. Eating out every single day, takeaway culture, all of that. Buying coffees all the time from outside, all of that. That's not from the ethos of Islam. The ethos of Islam is not to spend your money away on luxury items. At the end of the day, these are luxury items. But for us, they become the norm. So we don't consider them to be luxury items, unfortunately. As I said, if I go into it, people will say it's extreme. People assume it's extreme, which I don't really mind. Let's come back to it at the end, inshallah. Just let me finish this. So he says, ولن ينصرف الوجه إلى الله تعالى إلا بانصراف عما سواه فاجتهد في صرفه إليه وإن عجزت عنه على الدوام فليكن قولك في الحال صادقا. He says, so work hard in turning your heart away from the dunya and towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, i.e. outside of the salah. And if you're unable to do that, what do? Then make sure that at least during the dua al-istiftah, you're not lying. So make sure that at least for the duration of وَجَّهْتُ وَجْهِي لِلَّهِ or لِلَّذِي فَطَرَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ, you are focusing on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with your heart. Then he says, وَإِذَا قُلْتَ حَنِيفًا مُسْلِمًا فَيَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَخْطُرَ بِبَالِكَ أَنَّ الْمُسْلِمَ هُوَ الَّذِي سَلِمَ الْمُسْلِمُونَ مِنْ لِسَانِهِ وَيَدِهِ. Something to consider. He says, when you say Hanif al-Musliman in the dua al-istiftah, he says, what should come to your mind is that al-Muslim, this is the word of the Prophet ﷺ, al-Muslimu huwa alladhi salima al-Muslimuna min lisanihi wa yadi. He is the one whom the Muslims are protected from his tongue and his hand. And so I have to ask myself, are the Muslims protected from my tongue and my hand? I.e., do I speak ill of other Muslims? Do I harm other Muslims with my hand? Subhanallah, you have Muslims stabbing other Muslims, Muslims shooting other Muslims. Just 2 weeks ago, there was a shooting. I won't mention where. Muslims shooting other Muslims. Alhamdulillah, they didn't die. And I hope they all involved learn a lesson, but they don't take into consideration وَمَنْ يَقْتُلْ مُؤْمِنًا مُتَعَمِّدًا فَجَزَاؤُهُ جَهَنَّمْ. Whoever kills a Muslim and they intend to do so, their punishment is the hellfire. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions they'll be therein for eternity. And there's an interpretation, what does that mean? Because the Muslim can't be in Jahannam for eternity, etc. But the point is, the Muslim is the one whom the Muslims are safe from his tongue and his hand. Add to that the extension of the tongue, the keyboard, whether it's a thumb board, fingerboard, keyboard, your weapon of choice. Today, there are many keyboard warriors, Allahul Musta'an, and the Muslims are not protected from their harm. They have built their clout upon attacking others, calling others names, using names for other Muslims that no God-fearing person would use to describe another Muslim. Which suggests perhaps some of these individuals are not Muslims. Perhaps they're not Muslims. Perhaps they're agents that are there to cause division and disrupt the unity amongst Muslims. Because it's hard to imagine a Muslim who fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would be happy to speak about, especially a da'i, in some of the ways that some of these people online talk about du'at. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, "Man aada li waliyan, faqad adhantuhu bil harb." Whoever takes one of my awliya as an enemy, I have started a war with that person. Who wants to go to war with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's impossible. But yet you have individuals that are attacking du'at and calling them horrific names. Do they not take a moment to think, what if that person is a wali from the awliya of Allah? And just because a person has mistakes, even if public, it doesn't mean that they can't be from the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sahaba of Badr, some of them made mistakes after Badr. And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? He said, perhaps Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looked to those who took part in Badr and said, do as you please, from this moment onwards, I have forgiven all of your sins. So perhaps some of the du'at, they're from the awliya of Allah, individuals that are spending their time calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Calling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Perhaps some of them, they've made financial sacrifices to call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They've made emotional sacrifices, mental sacrifices. And then you have this young person who's typing away on his keyboard and making memes, acting, I'm sorry to say it, but like a schoolgirl, and then he's going to attack other people and claim, that he's doing it in the name of Islam. No, if he understood Islam, he wouldn't do such things. And how many of these people do you have? It's a lack of maturity, it's a lack of understanding Islam, and ironically, it's a lack of masculinity as well. Because a man doesn't act like that. And it's a point for some of these individuals to attack others in the name of masculinity. A man doesn't put pictures of himself all over the internet making poses. A man doesn't backbite and gossip in the manner that these individuals do. And so he's saying, when you say Hanifan Musliman, ask yourself, are the Muslims safe from my tongue and from my hand? And we have to really think about this, and we have to speak to young brothers about this, because it's young brothers stabbing each other, shooting each other, robbing each other. And they will not realize the consequence, unfortunately, until later on in their life and until they stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. How many young brothers, they spent their 20s, their late teens, their 20s involved in that type of lifestyle, and they come to realize, unfortunately, in the 30s, the consequences of that lifestyle. If they're not in prison, they're outside, you can see the impact that lifestyle has on them. And how many young brothers, they're now facing long sentences, 20 years in prison, for what? For what? A moment. And now what? Entire life is gone. Their entire lives gone in prison for what? How many young brothers have lost their lives because of these types of situations, heated moments, arrogance and pride? And this is all from the plot of shaitan. Then he says, وَإِذَا He says, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ كَذَلِكَ كُنْتَ كَاذِبًا. So if others are not safe from your tongue and your hand, then you're a liar. When you say, حَنِيفًا مُسْلِمًا in your dua al-istiftah. And so we have to think very, very carefully before we speak about others and the way we use our hands. Then he says, فَاجْتَهِدْ فِي أَن تَعْزِمَ عَلَيْهِ فِي الْإِسْتِقْبَالِ وَتَنْدِمَ عَلَى مَا سَبَقَ. He says, if you have previously harmed Muslims with your tongue and your hand, have the strong will, determination, resolution that you're not going to go back to it, and be regretful for that which has passed from you. And remember, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Ghiba is dhikru akhaka bima yakrah. It is to mention about your brother that which he dislikes, even if it's true. Even if it's true. Let's say, for example, a brother is overweight, and you say, and he's not there, oh, that brother is fat. It might be true. He doesn't like it. Ghiba. Let's say a brother is slim, and he's trying to bulk up, and you say about him, when he's not there, oh, that brother is skinny. It might be true, but he doesn't like it. That's ghiba. Even if you make a sign, if you wince, for example, when someone comes into the room, people don't do it anymore, but for example, making a sign like that, or if you look at your companion when another brother is talking, etc., to kind of indicate, oh, look, listen to him. All of that falls into ghiba. Memes, emojis, all of these things can be ghiba. Sending messages about other people, ghiba. And the Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? When he was asked, will people be thrown into the hellfire for that which they say with their tongues? He said, will people be thrown into the hellfire for anything other than that which they say with their tongues? So we have to be very careful. The tongue can be an enemy if you don't control it. Then he says, وَإِذَا قُلْتَ وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ فَاخْطُرْ بِبَالِكَ الشِّرْكَ الْخَفِيِّ. And when you say, I am not from those who ascribe partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, allow yourself to reflect over الشِّرْك الْخَفِيِّ, the hidden shirk, the minor shirk, which is what? Riya, showing off. He says, وَكُنْ حَذِرًا مُشْفِقًا مِنْ. And be aware of it, be on guard of minor shirk. For example, you start to pray, someone comes, you start to lengthen your prayer. You're reciting Quran, people come, you start to beautify your prayer. And this is something especially for Imams. And I say it to myself firstly and foremostly, but especially for Imams. You have to be very careful. Imama it's not something that people should rush to. If you really think about responsibility, you're responsible for all of the prayers of those behind you, and it's far easier for you to have riya than those that are praying behind you. And so it's very dangerous. You shouldn't rush to lead. Those who really understand leadership, run away from it, not to it. And imama is a small type of leadership. It's leadership in prayer, which is a small type of leadership. Not to hype up the position of imama, no, but so that we can understand the responsibility. If there are a few individuals and one has the ability to lead over you, they're competent, they have the recitation, etc., let them lead. Why? Because then you don't have to worry about riya. You can focus on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you unfortunately find young brothers especially, they want to lead, they rush to lead. Why? Because they want people to hear their voice. And on Yawm al-Qiyamah, the first to be thrown into hellfire is who? The one who learns and reads the Quran to be called a qari. And likewise on Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube, putting up clips of our recitation. Again, we have to be very careful. It's not to suggest that everyone that does it is showing off. No, only Allah knows the intentions. I'm sure there are many that do it for the sake of spreading the Quran and making the Quran relevant to their generation, etc. May Allah reward them. I'm sure there are many. But for us, I'm saying, we have to be careful that we don't upload things. Why? Because we want to show off. We want to be known as this or that. Because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, we will have no reward for the time that we spent in doing so. Then he says, وَكُنْ حَذِرًا مُشْفِقًا مِنْ وَاسْتَشْعِرَ الْخَجْلَةَ فِي قَلْبِكَ إِنْ وَصَّفْتَ نَفْسَكَ بِأَنَّكَ لَسْتَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ فَإِنَّ اسْمَ الشِّرْكِ يَقَعَ عَلَى الْقَلِيلِ وَالْكَثِيرِ مِنْ. And he says, you should feel embarrassed when you say وَمَا أَنَا مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. Why? Because shirk, you can use shirk to refer to ascribing partners to Allah, but also to refer to showing off. And there isn't anyone that's free of showing off except the one that's really worked on his heart for a long time. May Allah cure us and guide us. Then he says, وَإِن قُلْتَ مَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ هَذَا حَالَ عَبْدٍ مَفْقُودٍ لِنَفْسِهِ مَوْجُودٌ لِسَيِّدِهِ. So when you say مَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ, my life and my death is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this goes back to what we were saying about the purpose of life. The purpose of life is what? To live for Allah and to die for Allah. That's the aspiration of the mu'min, that he lives for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake and he dies for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's sake. And he's saying that this is the state of the lost slave who is looking for his master. And that's our case in the salah. And just generally speaking, we should have that dependence upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should have that dependence upon Allah. Oh Allah, and we should be mentioning this in our adhkar. Oh Allah, don't give my affair back to me even for the duration of an eye blink. Why? Because we don't know what's good for us. We cannot direct ourselves towards that which is good for us, and we are totally dependent upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for everything, for our provision, for our health, for our wealth, our sanity, our iman, everything that we have, we're dependent upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we should feel that we are lost without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We should feel lost, and we should feel that in the salah. So that when we're standing in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we attach ourselves. We're turning back to our owner, our master, our creator, our sustainer, our nurturer, and so on and so forth. And so we should have that feeling in our heart. And then he says, وَأَمَّا الْقِرَاءَةِ فَإِذَا قُلْتَ أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ فَاعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ عَدُوُّكَ وَمُتَرَصِّدٌ لِصَرْفِ قَلْبِكَ عَنِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And when you say, أَعُوذُ بِاللَّهِ مِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ, I seek refuge in Allah from الشَّيْطَانِ الرَّجِيمِ, the cursed shaitan, the one who has been distance from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, know that he is your enemy. Huwa al-adu, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. He is your enemy. And he is working to turn your heart away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your salah and outside of your salah. And think about our situation today. Those who work for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's very clear that they're working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They have a framework, they have direction. Those who have turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and they are not working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are they working for? Who do they believe they're working for? Who do they believe they're working for? Themselves. But there's a saying in the West, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince man that he doesn't exist. And so really, they're working for shaitan. Those who are not working for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are working for shaitan. Why? Because shaitan is manipulating them through their desires. And the mediums, the tools, the technologies that they develop are all tools for shaitan and his soldiers. Because shaitan is the one that is manipulating and driving and directing these people. If you are not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you are being manipulated by shaitan. It's not to suggest that every person is a soldier of shaitan. No, of course not. There are those that are looking for guidance, etc. I'm talking about those who have turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who have turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his framework, and they believe that they're following themselves. They believe they're following their mind. And you can see that today. You can see that today. What does shaitan say? That I'm going to misguide them, and I'm going to command them, and they're going to change the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what do we have today? Those who assume that they're following what they believe they are, and what are they doing to themselves? Changing their creation, etc. And then he says, and this is حَسَدًا لَكَ عَلَى مُنَاجَاتِكَ مَعَ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ وَسُجُودِكَ لَهُ. This comes from envy. Shaitan envies us. The fact that we are prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Shaitan is the one who was risen to the level of the angels due to his worship. Some of the ulama, they say he was from the malaika, and some say he was from the jinn. We're not going to get into that issue now. And avoiding the issue completely. Those who say that he was from the angels, they say that he lost that position due to his lack of obedience. And those who say that he was from the jinn, they say that he continued to be a jinni anyway. He disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the evidence suggests that he was from the jinn in the Quran. But the point being, he was worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He was someone who was close to the angels due to his worship, if not from the angels themselves, according to one of the opinions. And so when he sees us worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's jealous. He's jealous. And he says مع أنه لعن بسبب سجدة واحدة تركها ولم يوفق لها. Even though he himself, the reason that he was cursed is because he left off one sajda that he was commanded towards, he left it off. He wasn't able to do it. He wasn't able to overcome his pride and his ego. Likewise, Quraysh, they were not able to overcome their pride and their ego. Banu Israel, they were not able to overcome their pride and their ego. Fir'aun, unable to overcome his pride and his ego. The Qawm Salih, Qawm Ad, and so on and so forth, unable to overcome their pride and their ego. Pride and ego will destroy a person and take a person to Jahannam. And that alone is enough of an indication for the purification of the heart. We have to work on the heart. And the older you get, the more difficult it becomes if you are not aware of the sicknesses. Then he says, وَإِنَّ اسْتَعَاذَتَكَ بِاللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ مِنْهُ بِتَرْكِ مَا يُحِبُّهُ وَتَبْدِيلُهُ بِمَا يُحِبُّ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ بِمُجَرِّدْ قَوْلِهِ. And your isti'adha, when you say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, what you're asking for is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant you the ability to stay away from what shaitan loves for you and to turn to what Allah loves for you. And as was mentioned earlier, shaitan manipulates those who are not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He manipulates those on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects them and Allah guides them and Allah brings them back to the right path. But those who are not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become tools of shaitan. And that's why all of the mediums of entertainment today, you see it being used to what? To destroy man and to corrupt man. Because man stripped himself of God in the Western societies, and so he has no framework whatsoever. Even the Christian framework and the Jewish framework, there's still an element of belief, morality, and so on and so forth. And that protects man from the destructions and the vices that he is destroying himself with today. But when man turned away from those frameworks, we have ended up in this place that we are currently in, and the last vanguard is Islam. It's the last line of defense against shaitan and his awliya. And that's why it's very important that we apply Islam and we teach Islam to others. We'll conclude with that, inshallah. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad.